Welcome to Motor Development and Skill Learning, Chapter 13, Sensory Perceptual Development. Let's get going. So sensation versus perception. Sensation is the neural activity triggered by a stimulus activating a sensory receptor. Sensory nerve impulses will travel sensory nerve pathways to your brain. And perception is a multi-stage process in your central nervous system. It includes selection, processing, organization, integration of information received from the senses. Identical sensations can yield different perceptions. So understanding this, this is sort of like, um, somebody taps you on the back of your shoulder, right? You may feel like, okay, they tapped me with one finger. You may feel like they patted you with one hand, right? And so based on just the sensory sensation, you start to create a perception, right? And so then you turn to look and you realize, no, they were tapping you with three fingers, right? So again, your perception of something can be different. The sensation, even though you have some identical sensations, sometimes you yield different perceptions, and sometimes it's the location of the sensation, the force of the sensation, like is somebody doing it hard, is somebody doing it soft, so on and so forth, right? So again, perception is basically your brain trying to make sense of a sensation it feels, right? Some of the, and sometimes some of these things, taking this step further to some different things, some people will say this feels like, right? So years back, I was playing basketball, and I actually had one of my transverse abdominis muscle avulse off of my hip, and when it happened, it felt like, okay, so there's a sensation that happened. I heard a pop, and I felt instant pain. Okay, that pain felt like, to me, I didn't feel like a bone avulsing because of a muscle somehow just pulled and tore the bone away. What it felt like was somebody reached around and hit me like open hand, slapped me as hard as they could, in a way that was just so hard, like it caused this instantaneous pain that I'd never felt in that area, right? So again, my brain had a perception of something that wasn't actually what the real sensation was. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes we have a good, accurate account of the perception and sensation as well. So understand that because of that, there's two different things that are actually going on, so to speak, or actually there's more than two different things, but so on and so forth. So again, if you look at this, these things all play into, so an optical illusion, you have your motor competence, which plays into perceived motor competence versus actual motor competence, your physical activity, which again, perceived motor competence and physical activity have direct relation, as well as through the motor competence. You got body comp, which influences and is influenced by perceived motor competence, also influenced by actual motor competence, also influences physical activity, and then all of them are influenced or influence on health-related fitness as well, right? So perception gives meaning. What other illusions have you seen that can be perceived as different objects or pictures, right? Sometimes you see somebody from afar, you think there's somebody else, and you get closer. We have visual illusions, we have physical illusions. You feel something that, you think it's this until you can actually see it, so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot of those things. Developmentalists have much to learn about the role of movement in perceptual development. And some view perception and action or movement as inseparable. Okay, and so again, there's things to back that up, and there's also things that negate that in the research, right? So your sensory systems function as individual structural constraints. They also work together too. right? So yeah, there are some different things that work independent, but then they also collaborate. All right. So focus is on visual, kinesthetic, and auditory senses. So again, how might sensory disabilities act as a rate limiter to development? Um, you know, again, when you look at walking skills, you look at especially movement patterns. You know, like if you think of walking to running, as well as you know, like as well as like especially in sports when you look at agility and navigating over different terrains and so on and so forth, if you can't see, it creates how your body navigates things. So for instance, if you are walking on a flat surface, that flat surface now comes to an incline or decline. The way you step based on your visual perception is different as it inclines versus as it declines, right? Especially if you're moving at high rates of speed, like you're sprinting or something like that. You do different body leans. You adjust for how your foot's going to plant. So if it's on an incline, you adjust to dorsiflex a little bit more, or you plantar flex a little bit more as something declines, right? These are all things that when you have your vision, it's not limited as much. When you don't have vision, you're not going to want to sprint up and down hills without your vision. So knowing hills are there and you may not know when they're coming, you're going to be very cautious in your foot placements and things like that, to try to compensate as you feel, rather than use your visual to predetermine what's going on. Infants have functionally useful vision. Again, their vision isn't fully developed, so they don't have like really good vision, but it's functionally useful, right? By 6 months of age, vision is adequate for locomotion through their environment. Acuity is the sharpness of their sight. In the first month, acuity is 2400, which is 5% of the adult level. Infants can differentiate facial features at 20 inches. Acuity is approximately 2030 by age 5 years and 2020 by 10. Okay. Measurement of visual acuity also often involves reading block letters, where size and spaces between parts and letters can be manipulated. Results are expressed on the Snellen scale, in which 20/20 vision requires no correction. So when you guys go to the eye doctor and you see the descending lines of letters as they come down and they get smaller and smaller and smaller, that's the scale that we use. Visual changes with aging. Declines in vision have implications for skill performance and everyday living tasks. Any of you that have grandparents with failing visual acuity, you see this. My grandfather, he was past several years now. His vision was failing, and again, his daily movement and skills and things like that, navigating, walking in his house and all that, declined as well. Presbyopia affects ability to see nearby images and can be corrected with lenses. Older adults need more light in dim environments as well. They start to lose their ability to see, not necessarily night vision as much, although that diminishes quite a bit as well. But even in lower lighted areas, their eyes don't adjust as well and accommodate for better vision. Symptoms of visual problems at any age: lack of eye-hand coordination, squinting, under or overachieving for objects, and unusual head movements, trying to like pick things up and see things, right? Visual perception involves perception of space, objects, and movements. So again, some people may have trouble determining, is that further or closer than it is. They may have trouble picking things up out of the peripheral, right? Some folks have trouble picking up movements, versus other folks, picking up movements very quickly, right? Space perception requires perception of depth and distance. Information can come from the following retinal disparities: motion parallax and optic flows. What daily living activities rely on perception of space? sports, dance activities. You know, most sports are gonna deal with all of that, right? You know, your space from a defender, you know, if you're shooting a basket, somebody's throwing a baseball, you're trying to hit it or catch it, you know, you're a lot of activities in your daily life, right? Um, are gonna rely on the perception of space that you have. Infants have mechanics for retinal disparities and motion parallax. By 6 months, infants can perceive depth. Depth perception is refined to adult-like levels in adolescence, and number of older adults who failed depth perception tests is greater than the number of young adults. And again, this depth perception, it can be a risk factor for things such as falls and, you know, like catching your foot on a step and so on and so forth. Perception of objects. Object attributes are size, shape, and motion. Perception is based on information about edges. Edges are classified as either boundaries or not boundaries, and boundaries are assigned objects. So if somebody's throwing a frisbee versus a ball, right? Your perception of, you know, how close it is, how big it is, you know, when it's going to arrive, and all that is different based on the object, the way that it's moving and coming towards you or coming somewhere near you. Aspect of object perception, figure and background objects of interest seen as distinct from the background, right? So if you're focused on a baseball, you shouldn't be able to see all the people out in the stands behind the outfield wall, right? You know, or you see them, but you don't see them, I guess. You know, you're focused on the ball, not so much them, right? They become fuzzy background noise to your eyes. Whole and part. Parts of a picture object discriminated from the whole. It can be integrated, parts and whole perceived simultaneous. Shape and orientation or object recognized even if its orientation changes. So here's a drawing used to test whole and parts perception, right? So when you glance at it, first thing you see is a jack-o'-lantern, right? As you look closer, you realize that it's got 2 oranges as the eyes, strawberry for the nose, and a banana as the mouth. But when this first comes up, so we'll kind of, you know, you don't see that at first. Now that I've done it several times, you may start to pick up what's actually in the picture right away, right? But normally when you first see that, you look at the words above, you're seeing drawing used to test whole and part perception. You're seeing that, and out of your periphery, you just see a jack-o'-lantern smiling. And then when you look down, you notice that there's some oddities to it, right? Again, have you ever seen artwork in which larger objects or pictures are composed of smaller ones unrelated to the larger picture? Have you observed young child's reaction to such display? If so, describe it. Sometimes you might see a picture. So say there's a picture of like I've seen some of those ones where they have a picture of a person, right? Or they'll have a picture of like maybe a building, you know, and then that building is made out of different pictures of the people who work in that building or something, and they use different shades of the pictures to create like an overall object of the building, right? You know, there's a lot of things like that. Or, you know, I've seen pictures. Lately I saw one that was a picture of Kobe not too long after he had died, and they used a bunch of other different pictures of Kobe playing basketball that made up this large picture of like a profile, like it was him looking, you know, like sitting for a picture type thing. Development of object perception. Infants may use depth and motion more than edges. Children refine figure and ground and whole and part perception, especially under difficult conditions. And pre-adolescents reach adult levels, which is adult sensitivity goes beyond that needed to perceive objects in everyday world, right? So teenagers' vision is close to adult vision. Distance and object perception interact. With adequate visual perception, perceived objects retain size even if retinal image size changes because of change in distance from observer to object. Newborns demonstrate perception of size constancy with varying distances. as well. So again, they're not getting the whole picture, but they get enough is basically what it's saying, right? So they can see the size um, at the different distances, but again, it's what they're seeing is vastly different than that of the adult, right? It's not developed as much. Newborns are sensitive to object shape. They will perceive faces. They can identify their mother's face more readily than others. Children refine their ability to detect subtle changes in object orientation. And what aspects of learning in classroom involve object orientation, right? Again, it depends on, you know, your class, but again, with us, you know, when we're doing things like throwing a ball back and forth, or you know, you're looking at your perception of you're moving in a space, doing agility drills and things like that can all be part of that. Some neurological mechanisms are dedicated to detecting motion. Infants perceive motion. Perception of direction and velocity of motion improves during infancy. So again, you know, it's one of those things like I could throw a ball to a baby or roll a ball to a baby. Let's do that. Throwing a ball at a baby would be kind of mean because they're probably not going to catch it. So say you have an infant that can sit up and you roll the ball to them, right? They see the ball coming. Now, if I roll it at different speeds, you know, it's at first they're not really going to pick up on that's coming fast versus slow, but as they get a little bit older and a little bit older through their infancy, they will start to detect that, you know, that ball's moving slower than that ball, or that ball's moving faster. Now again, they might not verbalize it, but they'll have a conceptual idea of what's going on. Preferential looking. Infants look at new or novel objects over familiar ones. Again, it's, you know, just kind of that curiosity that we have as humans, like, oh, this is new, what is it? Attention wanders from object to which the infant is habituated. Researchers habituate an infant to an object or pattern, then present familiar object or pattern and a new one, right? And so they do, again, you know, this research is hard because it's observational, and the fact that it's not like when we do certain things with adults, we can ask them questions, right? With the, you know, so they got to observe, like, okay, you know, and try to see, does the pattern, do they tend to look at this versus this, right? And so again, you know, they do a lot of this, and over time they start to notice some patterns, right? If an infant can detect a difference, they tend to look at the new object, right? And so again, whether it's a difference, you know, some people argue it's a difference, or the difference is just more appealing, not necessarily that it's different. It just, you know, maybe it has a color or shape or something that gets the infant's eye, where the researchers, are, you know, some researchers will say, no, it's, you may have just given them something more appealing. Other researchers say, no, it's because it's different, you know, just in the difference itself. So do you believe these methods provide accurate information about infant perception? You know, the problem is, you know, like, so for me, I give it a yes and a no, you know, and you're like, well, how can you, I mean, we don't know, right? I mean, it could be accurate. You know, that's the thing. It really could be accurate. But being that we can't get feedback that we need, we don't know. So yes, I am skeptical. You know, it's all based on what we perceive as researchers, and then inferring what's actually going on in the kid's head. And again, that's the thing. We don't know what a baby is thinking, right? We're just inferring what we think a baby would think based on our adult brains, and not being able to recall what an infant brain thinks at that time. Because again, when I think in my head, I think in terms of pictures and words. Um, Babies don't have words in their heads because they haven't developed language yet, right? So, and again, with pictures, that, you know, like, how do they interpret the pictures? You know, I interpret pictures that I understand. You know, like if I'm say, okay, there's a bear in the woods. Well, in my head, I can picture a bear in woods, you know, like out in the forest. Like, I know what these things are. I know what they look like. I, you know, have a clear-cut picture of these things. What is a baby thinking? They don't know what a bear is. They don't know what the woods are. But if they saw a bear in the woods, what would they actually be thinking and seeing, right? So we don't really know, right? Kinesthesis arise from your proprioceptors. And there are two types of proprioceptors. You have your somatosensors, which are muscle spindles that have a major role in position, movement, senses, and then skin receptors have secondary role. And then we have our vestibular apparatus, right? So kinesthesis in infancy, receptors probably function prenatally. Newborns respond to touch and can locate touches to the face. The vestibular apparatus functions by age 2 months, if not earlier. Again, they think at age 2 months because they start to see, the baby's, like movement and all that. Maybe it's working before and they're just not showing signs of things. Maybe not, so who knows? Kinesthetic changes with aging. Research information is sparse. Some older adults experience loss of sensitivity. Kinesthetic perception involves perception of these elements: tactile location, manipulation, and movement. Body awareness, awareness of self, where your body is in spatial recognition of other objects and things, whether moving or stationary. Laterality, lateral dominance, side preferences, spatial orientation, and directionality, right? So these all play into it. And sometimes some people have greater awareness of things than others, or some are pretty great on all parameters. Some may be lacking in all parameters. Tactile location or localization. Newborns can feel touches. For what activity in the first hours after birth is perception of touch important? Again, when they try to get them to latch on to feed, hearing their mother's heartbeat, those are all important. Perception of touch. Perception of, so like when they, when they breastfeed and they can feel that on their mouth, it triggers that sucking reaction that they have. Perception of touch location improves in early childhood. Thresholds for discriminating between one touch and two nearby touches improves in childhood. Manipulation of movement. In infants, manipulation is more accidental than purposeful. Again, it's kind of exploratory as they think. Manipulation becomes more methodical around 6 years. Haptic memory, object recognition, and speed of recognition improve in childhood. In between 5 and 8 years, there's great improvements in perception of the extent of the movement. Body awareness or awareness of self, identifying body parts. Again, children improve in labeling as they get older. Objective awareness of self develops in second year. Up to 30 months, scale errors are common but improve thereafter. And knowing the body's spatial dimensions, children master up and down, then front and back, and finally side to side. Laterality, this involves knowing the sides of the body are distinct. Children show adult-like responses by age 10 years. Labeling left and right improves in late childhood. You'll see with kids, like, all right, go left, go right. Sometimes they got to think about it. They're like, which hand do I write with, right? I still see adults do that sometimes, which makes me worrisome. Children with developmental delays often struggle to cross the midline of the body with the hand and arms to complete a task on the opposite side. So what school, motor, or daily living tasks require crossing the midline? You could think passing things across from left to right or right to left. Riding could be one of those. Throwing things, like throwing a frisbee or something like that. That's purely left to right. Playing sports like tennis. A lot of different things you can think of where you cross the midline. Body awareness, lateral dominance, preferring one eye, ear, hand, or foot over the other. Infant show preference, handedness is established around age 4 years. I'm left-handed. Again, they did not know I was left-handed until I believe I was in second grade, is when I had a teacher finally tell my parents to stop forcing me to write with my right hand, that my my writing had to do with me writing with the wrong hand. By that time, they did not spend any time trying to teach me how to hold anything with my left hand. So I used to write, I had to actually, it was in adulthood when I had to learn how to hold a spoon and write and all that, because by that time it just, I don't know, I guess my parents just thought, oh well, whatever. Teachers didn't want to bother teaching me. So yeah, I still hold a pen sort of weird. And I was in college when I learned how to hold eating utensils correctly. So again, my handedness apparently wasn't established, and part of it was because everything was always put in my right hand, so I just did things right-handed. And it was in second grade that I learned that I was left-handed, and it was amazing. Even sports like baseball, I was finally, somebody gave me a left-handed glove, and realizing how much easier it was to throw with my left hand than right hand and everything else, and bat from the left side made things a lot more fun, right? Side preference, this is favoring one of our eyes, ears, and feet over the other. Just in hand, pure dominance, favored side is the same for all body parts. Mixed dominance, favored side is not the same. No evidence shows that pure dominance is necessary. Again, I'm not a pure dominant person. My jumping, the foot I like to jump off is my right. My kicking foot is now my left. It used to be my right. I play guitar right-handed. I used to do tennis both. I do everything baseball left-handed. I shoot in basketball left-handed, left-handed, throw left-handed. Trying to think some other things. I eat right-handed. What else? I'm right eye dominant. And ear-wise, I'm not really sure. I think I might actually be right ear dominant. So again, I'm a mixed dominance person. Spatial orientation and direction. Spatial orientation improves between 6 and 8 years. Directionality improves in late childhood, and transposing right and left improves in adolescence. Kinesthetic changes with aging. Some sensitivity may be lost as we age. Proprioceptive acuity declines in older ages. Impairments in lower limbs might play a role in loss of balance, and more research is needed to really determine. Again, it's probably more multifactorial. Again, this is motor skills and development class, so they want to look at this. Again, the things that may play into this. Again, yes, loss of sensation on all those things. But strength, flexibility may also play into that. With brittle bones, it causes different movement patterns, so on and so forth, right? Loss of vision, loss of tactile sensations. So, it's multifactorial, right? Auditory development, sensation. 3 structures are involved in hearing: external ear, middle ear, and cochlea of the inner ear. Audition infancy. Infants' threshold for sound is higher than adults, but allows detection of normal speaking voice. Rapid improvement is seen in the first week. Again, it's really weird how they do that whole like snapping, and they do some of those things. Do they know? Do they not know? No, it's all observe. They observe it. When a kid doesn't show any reaction to noises and things is when they're concerned, but how much that they pick up and all that stuff, it's very theoretical. At 3 months, infants hear low frequency sounds well. Would infants listen more to speech or more to music? I don't know that they really know that. Again, if you're talking about, it might depend on if the music or the speech is in the frequencies that they hear better. Would infants listen to their mother's voice over the voices of others? Again, familiarity, that's going to the familiarity over other things. And again, theoretically, maybe, who knows? That's a voice that they're probably familiar with, but do they listen to it, or are they trying to look for new, right? So there's the voice they're familiar with, and there's things that they're not familiar with. So again, it may depend on the kid and how they perceive things, right? They may perceive other voices as a threat. Other ones might perceive it as something to be curious about, right? Who knows? Hearing loss is more frequent in older adults. Some loss might have physiological source. Some loss might result from lifelong exposures to environmental noises. Absolute differential thresholds generally increase, and hearing amid a noisy background is more difficult. Auditory perception involves perception of the following location. Is the noise coming from in front, back, left, right, things like that? How far off? Differences in similar sounds, patterns of sounds, and auditory figure and ground. Location, newborns turn in the direction of the sound. By age 3 years, children can locate even distant sounds. Little is known about infants' perception of the distance of the sound. Again, if they can't talk, they can't tell. Older adults with pre-bicusis, I can't say that word, or presbycusis, have difficulty locating sound. I have difficulty saying it. But again, you know, like I've noticed this with my grandma and my grandfather before that. My grandma, especially, her hearing is really bad. You know, sometimes, you know, like if you're talking to her, so if I'm behind her to one of the sides, she may hear my voice and she may turn the wrong way because she can't really locate where the sound is, right? Infants can discriminate basic speech sounds at 1 to 4 months of age, or at least they think they can. Accuracy and discrimination improves in childhood. Older adults may have difficulty with speech perception because of declines in sensitivity to pure tones. Patterns. 3 properties give rise to pattern: time, intensity, and frequency. Temporal patterns are perceived by age 1 year. Intensity changes are detected between 5 and 11 months, or as far as they think they are, based on the perceptions they do when they do experiments, right? That the researchers think they see. Simple frequency patterns are, and I'm saying that, I'm not, if any of y'all are motor development researchers or anything like that, and you're like 100% on board with this stuff, don't think I might criticize it. I'm just saying, you know, the problem that you run into, you know, like, again, I work with, you know, children and adults, you know, and the stuff that I do, but they're at ages where, you know, you can ask questions. What you guys are doing, I understand, is complex. So in case you're watching this, don't think I'm knocking what you do. I get you work with what you can work with, and you've got to make your you know, you got to infer what you can infer based on what you think is going on, and so on and so forth. So we appreciate the work you do. It's just when things are written as this is what's going on, you know, that's where I'm like, well, but do we 100% know? No, we don't. Okay, so let's say this is what we think's going on, right? You know, I mean, just let's be honest, right? Improvements are made throughout childhood in perceiving longer, more complex patterns. And again, what implication does pattern perception have for infants in regards to language and music of their culture? In all honesty, not really sure. You know, I mean, they pick up on them to what extent they do, but we're not really sure what it is, right? Figure and ground. Infants can distinguish a sound from ambient noise. So again, is it, you know, is it part of the total overall noise, or like when you know, like, so, you know, when my kids are watching TV, you know, I notice some of my kids can pick up, you know, like a real, like the noise of their father yelling their name much easier than some other kids who it just becomes background noise to everything else going on outside of them watching TV, right? Again, a little else that's known: older adults have more difficulty hearing conversations amid background noises. Sensory systems are functional at birth. Improvement during infancy is rapid, or as far as we know it is, and the level of function is sufficient for learning tasks facing infants and toddlers, right? Infants possess basic perceptual ability, again, as far as we know. Subtle discrimination, complex judgment improve in childhood, and adults may have difficulty perceiving that the senses are impaired, right? When we start to lose or we start to decline. Intermodal perception, events are perceived through various modalities. Two perspectives exist. Infants must learn how unique sensations from different modalities are related to one another, and infants must learn about the world from unified information coming through different modalities. Again, what does that mean? Again, how they perceive it and how they understand it, nobody really knows, right? But modal invariants are patterns in space and time that do not differ across modalities. Auditory visual intermodal perception. Newborns turn towards a sound and demonstrate a basic level of integration early in their first year. So that's where they do the snapping, and if they kind of turn towards that side, they're like, all right, they're getting that it's coming from this area, right? And then they can snap on the other side. Discrimination of patterns across these modalities improves in childhood. Task is easier for children when a visual pattern is presented first. So what does this say about young children using their senses? That again, we heavily rely on certain senses, whether visual, whether it's mostly visual or sound, but again, most kids, their visual patterns are very highly used. As again, as adults, we tend to rely, if we have good vision, we tend to rely on it pretty heavily. Visual kinesthetic intermodal perception. Infants seem to relate objects that they can see to objects they have mouthed. Again, they use their physical touch perception with their visual perception. Recognition of an object across modalities is shown in the first year, but selecting items that match across modalities comes later. And then finer discriminations improve as they get older, right? Visual first presentation is easy or easier. Brain scanning indicates 7 to 8 months old, integrate audio and tactile information. So again, they'll say, when they have these informations presented while they're monitoring their brain, they'll see increased brain activity, through EEG or other methods that they'll measure. Perception improves in childhood. Knowledge of the object names is relevant, and more research, again, is needed. And as we get more technology, we can understand more, right? Spatial temporal intermodal perception. We hypothesize that space and time are invariant across modalities. Integrating two spatial stimuli is easiest, so two temporal stimuli is going to be harder. Integrating spatial and temporal stimuli is intermediate in difficulty, and ability to integrate subtle aspects continues to improve during their adolescence, right? Intermodal developmental summary. Intermodal coordination begins at birth. Performance of matching tasks and subtle discrimination improves throughout childhood and adolescence. Accuracy of performance is related to the order of presentation. Easiest versions present visual information first. So visual kinesthetic auditory systems are present and function at birth and continue to improve throughout childhood. By late childhood, systems have developed to levels similar to adults, and each system undergoes changes during the aging process, and these changes can be compensated for through various means. All right, so that's that. Any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. And we'll do chapter 14 next.